Today, we're diving into an ancient prophecy from the book of Jeremiah. And it's a warning that was delivered to a world that's long gone, but it asks the question that every single superpower on the planet should probably be asking itself right now. And that question is this: does a nation's strength, we're talking its wealth, its military, its reputation, does any of that actually guarantee its survival? Well, if you look at Jeremiah chapter 49, the answer seems to be a loud, clear no. And we're about to find out why. All right, to really get what's going on, we need to hop in a time machine and go back to the early 6th century BC. The prophet Jeremiah wasn't just talking to his own people in Judah. No, he was delivering these divine judgments to all the major players on the world stage. You've got nations like Ammon, Edom, and Damascus. This was a message for everybody. Now, when you dig into this message, something really fascinating starts to emerge. There's a pattern here, and it reveals this timeless cycle of pride and consequence that honestly applies way beyond the ancient world. Let's break that down. So the core pattern is actually pretty simple. It goes like this. A nation gets comfortable, it starts trusting in something other than God, maybe it's money, its geography, or its powerful friends. And, according to the prophecy, this misplaced faith always leads to divine judgment and, eventually, ruin. Let's look at some examples. This gets us to what I'd call the trap of false security. We're going to look at some specific case studies in pride and see exactly what these nations were relying on for their safety. Our first two case studies are Ammon and Damascus. As you can see here, they had totally different things they were putting their trust in, but they were both equally flawed. For the Ammonites, it was all about material security, their treasures, their fertile lands. For Damascus, it was something you couldn't even touch. It was their reputation and their perceived strength. And Jeremiah doesn't beat around the bush when it comes to Ammon. The text says they trusted in her treasures. I mean, you can just picture it. They looked at their lush, flowing valleys, at all their wealth, and they thought, we're untouchable. It gave them this false sense of safety, this belief that their prosperity was their ultimate shield. And here comes the consequence. The prophecy declares that even Milcom, their chief national god, shall go into captivity. Think about that. This is a complete teardown of their entire security system. It's not just that their money would fail them. The very idol they worshipped would be exposed as powerless. Okay, now let's switch gears and look at Damascus. Jeremiah calls it the city of praise. And that right there was their source of security, a stellar reputation. They had immense pride in their culture and their power. They were basically trusting in their own brand. But the judgment is a total, brutal reversal. The city of praise, this place of joy, is prophesied to become feeble. Panic and terror would take over, its young men would die in the streets, and its strength would just vanish, as if it was consumed by fire. The very thing they were so proud of would be turned to ashes. So this theme of pride, it really finds its ultimate example in our next case study, the nation of Edom. Their story is just this textbook example of how arrogance can lead to a spectacular fall. So what was Edom's deal? What was their particular flavor of pride? Well, it was a really toxic mix. First, you had their geography. They lived in these cliff fortresses, natural strongholds that made them feel physically invincible. And second, they had a reputation for wisdom. They were known for being the smart ones. You put those two together, and you get this deep-seated arrogance, a feeling that no one could ever touch them. And the text just cuts right to the heart of the problem. The pride of thine heart hath deceived thee. See, their arrogance wasn't actually strength. It was a self-inflicted blindness. It tricked them into believing they were safe, when, in reality, they were incredibly vulnerable. And this illustrates the consequence so perfectly. God's judgment would be to make Esau bare. Esau, of course, being the ancestor of the Edomites. So the very thing they trusted in, their hidden, secure, impenetrable fortresses, would be completely exposed and stripped away. There would be absolutely nowhere left to hide. And don't think for a second that Edom was just a one-off case. Now we're going to see how this judgment is pretty much inescapable, and it applies to other nations who built their security on equally shaky foundations. So let's look at the desert tribes of Kedar and Hazor. Their false security was just plain old complacency. The text says they dwell without care. They were living way out in a remote location, and they figured they were isolated and safe from all the big power struggles of the day. They basically thought they could just sit the whole thing out. And then, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you've got the mighty nation of Elam. Their security wasn't in being isolated. It was in being powerful. They trusted in their military, especially their incredible archers, who were described as the chief of their might. They truly believed their military strength made them invincible. But check out how the punishment is perfectly tailored to the crime. The complacent desert tribes, the ones who thought they were safe and sound, they're scattered in terror. And the mighty Elamites, who trusted in their archers, their bow, the very symbol and source of their power, is broken. God systematically takes apart the specific things they put their trust in. When it's all said and done, the verdict for many of these nations is just chilling. The judgment leads to total desolation, a land so empty and abandoned that the text says no man shall abide there. It's a picture of finality, of complete and utter ruin. Or is it? Just when you think it's all doom and gloom, the story takes this incredible turn. Our final section, Hope Beyond the Ruins, reveals a little glimmer of mercy right where you'd least expect to find it. Which leads us to the crucial question. After all this fire and destruction, after all these pronouncements of total desolation, is judgment really the final word here? Is that the end of the story? And here's the amazing twist. Woven right into these terrifying prophecies of doom are these explicit promises of future restoration. For both Ammon and Elam, Jeremiah says that God will eventually bring again their captivity, which is an ancient way of saying he's going to restore their fortunes and bring them home from exile. It shows that the judgment wasn't just about destruction, it was meant to be corrective. And you know, history actually backs up the first part of this story. The prophecies about all this destruction, they were largely fulfilled with shocking accuracy by the rising Babylonian Empire under King Nebuchadnezzar. He became the historical tool, the instrument that brought about this judgment, conquering and scattering these very nations. Okay, so after all of that, what are the big takeaways? I think it boils down to three crucial points. First, the message here is that God's authority extends over all nations, not just Israel. Second, national pride and putting your trust in false securities like wealth, power, or reputation, it always leads to a fall. And third, and maybe most important, God's justice isn't always the end of the story. It's often followed by the surprising hope of restoration. And that leaves us with one last, pretty challenging thought for today. If modern nations were judged by these ancient standards, what false securities of our own would be exposed? What about our economies, our technologies, our political ideologies? What would be revealed as fragile and temporary? It's definitely a question worth thinking about.